Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CoronaSphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. This is episode 13, being brought to you from the plane of infinite despair here out in the middle of nowhere. Today's episode is very simple, and today's episode is about morale. Morale is the single most important asset that a society can go to war with. And while we lost 4,000 or 5,000 people in Iraq and a larger number in Afghanistan, even the low end estimates for the number of people that will probably die as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic is in the tens of thousands. So clearly this is a war, and I think most people are treating it that way. They're certainly treating it with the seriousness that it deserves. So there's a question on morale, and the question is, how do you build morale? What is morale? And more importantly, how do you destroy morale? I think certainly the master of morale building in history, at least as far as I'm concerned, is Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Great Britain on the day that France fell to the Germans. France had the biggest army and the biggest air force on the continent. They were going to fight Hitler together, and he gets the news that France has collapsed and surrendered, and then he becomes Prime Minister. And the first thing he says to his people is, "I have nothing to offer you but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." That's credibility. He didn't say everything's going to be fine. He didn't say we got nothing to worry about. He didn't say, hey, don't worry, the experts have it. He says, we are in for a slog. It's going to be rough. And I'd be lying to you if I said otherwise. And he wasn't lying to the British people, and they knew that. And that's why he had the credibility. But the one thing about Winston Churchill, and I know this from personal experience because I know somebody who saw him in person doing this, and that's my mom. My mom is still a British subject. She was born in 1930, and she was in London during the first early days of the Blitz. In 1940, she was 10, and she can remember going out after the German bombers had left. And after a time, there'd be a cheer, and there'd be this short little fat man in a one-piece suit poking through the rubble and basically holding up the two fingers to the Germans, which later had to be sanitized as the V for victory, but basically it's the British version of the American symbol, except they've got two fingers instead of the one. What Churchill is basically saying is, yes, you've destroyed the city, yes, you've destroyed this ancient cathedral, whatever the case may be, but you haven't beaten us, and we'll be here tomorrow, we'll be waiting for you. And when we get on our feet again, then we're coming over to your town, and then you're going to see what you've started. So the issue is, how do you get people to be brave but not afraid? It's a tough question. Now, regarding the news media here in the United States, I'm certainly willing to concede that the first thing that the news media had to accomplish with the COVID-19 outbreak was make it clear that this is serious, that this is in fact a serious issue. And that, to some degree, in fact maybe to a large degree, means you have to scare people into believing that this is in fact something to worry about. But I think we can all agree that in the last 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks, COVID-19 is not exactly undercovered in the news. It's not like there's coverage lacking. It doesn't seem to me like there's an enormous crisis of people who are unaware of it. So you have to start asking yourself about some of these questions that we've been seeing lately and why they're being asked. Earlier today, I did a Bill Whittle Now episode where Scott presented me with an article that I have not seen, but it was an article from USA Today. And the article, in so many words, said that China has gotten control of the COVID-19 virus now, and they've done it through totalitarian means. And isn't it a shame that our American individualism is going to cost so many extra lives when clearly we see that the answer is over there in China? And there's so much wrong with that article that you immediately suspect that the person writing it is not in full possession of their wits, let alone journalistic credentials. To say that China has a handle on this disease, that they've got it under control, is does anybody believe that? I don't think a single person in the world believes that. I don't think the Chinese people believe it. In fact, I know they don't believe it. They're sending out signals that their government is lying. The Chinese government doesn't believe it, and the Chinese government doesn't really believe that we believe it. But the article was basically saying that these authoritarian techniques that the Communist Chinese Party have are superior. They're a better way of dealing with the disease than our ragged, undisciplined, individualistic kind of an approach that is going to get more Americans killed. Just for the sake of that article, the totalitarian government did not get a handle on the virus. They think that the numbers, the experts in the West who look at this, think that China may be underreporting their cases by a factor of 40, not 40%, 40 times more people infected and dying in China than they're letting on. That's the best estimate based on their curve when that information came out. When this virus began to take place, the totalitarian government refused to admit that it was possible to transmit from one human to another. And they said so for at least 2 months after they knew for a fact that this wasn't true. They ordered samples destroyed, all of this to save face. Because in the totalitarian Chinese government system that this article was referencing so glowingly, it's better to lose people than it is to lose face. And that's exactly what this was about. Millions of people ran away. Millions ran out of Wuhan province before they locked the gates down. And reports are in China that China has gone so far as to have people inside a building and then welded the doors closed to keep them inside. That's the totalitarian response to the disease. But it's the totalitarian system. It's not a victory because, number one, there's 40 times more cases and deaths than they're reporting. But it's the totalitarianism that caused the outbreak in the first place. A free society would have said, my God, we've made a mistake. We need to do something about this. And there wouldn't have been any lying about it. And if we'd had the ability to call in Chinese experts to help us, we would have done it. If you contrast that with the American response, what do you see? You see that with one or two exceptions, the American people have voluntarily agreed to abide by these public safety measures because they understand that it's a serious risk and they want to save the lives of fellow Americans. And they're undergoing pretty severe economic hardship right now, and there's going to be more of it coming. But they're doing it, and with one or two exceptions. Some college kids go down and party in Cabo San Lucas. They come back with 25, 26 of them infected. 2 different church congregations among the hundreds of thousands in America insisted on having their church congregations in person, and I support their right to do that. I don't think it's a good idea, but I support their right to do it. It is a small price to pay for the freedom to do that. And if you disagree and you think that the totalitarian lockdown of the Chinese is a better way to go, as this person in the USA Today article seemed to say, then when our individualist system of democracy, capitalism, and republicanism, small r, a republic, when that system has killed 50 million people, not 50,000, when 50 million Americans die of COVID-19, then you can start comparing us to the Chinese system, because the Chinese system killed 50 million of their own people in order to set up the totalitarian regime which locks down the country so effectively. Now, that's not why I wanted to talk about morale. That's just an example. All that you can deduce from an article like that is that we did it wrong and we're doing it wrong, and that China did it right. So why would you run an article like that? Here's a better question. I'm going to play this for you without introduction. It's only about a minute and a half. It's not a super long clip, but I'd like you to watch it, and I'd like you to ask yourself the question, why is the question that's being asked being asked? This was originally 20 minutes. I've just cut it to the bone, but basically this argument went on for a full 20 minutes. Take a look at this.
Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Yes, this may be an uncomfortable question, but what would the models have looked like that Dr. Burks and Dr. Thacker showed us? Please, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, we understand that we can't answer it
saying
we
if we
see
had
that.
started this sooner, we might not have 100,000 to 200,000 Americans dying.
Well, that makes an assumption that it was here. There was a lot back here that we didn't see. And until we had the antibody test, I can't really answer that.
Just to underscore what Dr. Burks was saying, if there was no virus in the background, there was nothing to mitigate. If there was virus there that we didn't know about, then the answer to your question is probably yes. Now, the only trouble with that is that whenever you come out and say something like that, it always becomes almost a soundbite that gets taken out of context. But I think that's very important, what Dr. Burks has said, is that if there was covert infections here that we didn't know about and we didn't mitigate then they would have made a difference. If there was virtually nothing there, then there's nothing to mitigate. And I don't know the answer to your question.
But we were watching South Korea, and China and Italy, and we weren't taking action when those countries were
Right,
spiking.
sure. In a perfect world, it would have been nice to know what was going on there. We didn't, but I believe, Jim, that we acted very, very early in that.
Okay, so what is the newsworthy purpose of a question like that? Is it going to affect how we treat people in the future? No. Is there any way that we can go back and do things that we might have done wrong? No. Was there evidence of malfeasance on part of anybody? No. Dr. Fauci said, here's a flat line back here. And as soon as we saw there was something here, we acted. So why is Jake Tapper saying, even though you acted the moment you knew there was a threat, would the death toll in America be lower if you'd acted earlier? And Fauci says, well, I think that goes without saying, but I'm not going to give you a number because it would be taken out of context, and it would be. What Jake Tapper is looking for, what Jake Tapper is fishing for, is he wants Dr. Fauci to say that if we had acted 2 weeks earlier, that 40,000 fewer Americans would have died, somewhere in that number. Because what he wants is, he wants to do exactly what Dr. Fauci accused him of. He wants to be able to say, delays on the part of the X-administration will lead to 40,000 extra deaths. The reason I say the X expression is because this is bigger than party politics. It's much bigger than that. It's not a question of pinning the tail of blame for something that didn't happen, because as Dr. Fauci explained, and as the graph clearly shows, there's no signal there until there is, and when there is, we act. So why is Jake Tapper going to so much trouble to construct an argument that says that we did it wrong and people are going to die because we did it wrong? Well, maybe the best way to answer that question is to take another situation and kind of turn up the contrast a little bit. So stay with me for a minute. We're going to have a brief press conference with Dwight Eisenhower, commander of U.S. forces in Europe during World War II, and the architect, the final responsibility for the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944. On June 6 of 1944, hundreds of thousands of troops went ashore, and 2,500 Americans were killed, mostly at Omaha Beach. So now imagine Dwight Eisenhower 2 days after the invasion, which was successful, by the way. And he gets asked a question that's something like this. General Eisenhower, it's clear now that virtually all of the casualties, and by the way, brackets, everything I'm saying is historically true. It's pretty clear from the casualties of General Eisenhower that almost all of the Americans killed were killed on Omaha Beach, but Omaha Beach was only one of 5 different landing zones. Americans also went ashore on Utah Beach and ran into relatively little opposition, and British Canadians went ashore on Gold and Juno and Sword beaches and also encountered very little opposition. So I'd like to know, sir, if you had landed those troops at Juno and Sword and Utah and Gold, how many lives do you think we would have saved? And by the way, just a follow-up, what do you say to the families of those Americans who died on Omaha Beach, knowing that as we look at the results of what actually happened, if you had sent them to another beach, they'd be alive today? Most of you right now are going through what Eisenhower would have said in reply, but that's not the point. Obviously, what Eisenhower would have said is that we didn't know until we knew. That's exactly what Donald Trump said. That's what Dr. Fauci said. That's what Dr. Birx said. That's what Mike Pence went on to say in that clip I showed you, which was originally a 20-minute long exchange. If we had known, we would have done something. The second we knew, we acted. Clearly, when you hear a question like that, you say, well, Eisenhower could have said, would have said, and obviously should have said, we didn't know which beach was going to be more dangerous until we went ashore. But that's not the point. The reporter in that fictional press conference that I just gave you knows that. He knows that Eisenhower didn't know where the resistance was going to be stiffer. And he also knows that if Eisenhower had known, he would have put the people ashore on the beaches where there wasn't such stiff resistance. He wouldn't have landed on Omaha Beach at all if he had known in advance. The reporter knows that. He knows that. So what is he trying to do? What the reporter is trying to do is he's trying to say that if we had done things differently, lives would have been saved, and we screwed it up. And that's the issue now. What does that accomplish? Does it undo the number of people who were killed on Omaha Beach? No. Does it help us in terms of planning future operations? No. There was no malfeasance. There was no incompetence. We didn't know what we didn't know until we knew it. What does it accomplish? The only thing that question accomplishes is to make the people of America feel like what was a heroic sacrifice suddenly feels like a botch job. That our boy didn't have to die on that beach. He could have gone to another beach. If Eisenhower had only known better or been more careful or done more planning, then my boy would be alive. And the only reason to ask a question like that of General Eisenhower 2 days after D-Day would be if you wanted to destroy the morale of the American people. So now you have to ask yourself, why would you ask a question like that? And why would you ask a question like, if only we'd behaved like China, we'd have the situation under control? Why would you ask a question like that? It's clearly false, and everybody knows it. What you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that the population does not ever get a sense of resolve. They live in a state of fear, and the reason they live in fear is because their officials are incompetent, and that means they can go ahead and be afraid. I did a show a couple of days ago. Dr. Vladimir Valenko, I think it was, who was showing in clinical tests in New York that a treatment of hydroxychloroquine plus zinc plus an antibiotic was showing tremendous positive results. 700 patients, none of them died, none of them intubated, 4 in the hospital for pneumonia, and he got to those cases late. That's a tremendous success record. I have heard anecdotally, I haven't had the time to be able to verify this, but I have heard anecdotally that that doctor's Twitter account was shut down. Why? Is he saying that the virus is not a threat? No. Is he saying that there's nothing to worry about? No. Is he saying stop all this social distancing and go out and start a doorknob licking contest? He's not saying any of that. So why would his Twitter account be shut down if it was no other reason than to destroy morale? There's no other explanation for it. Actually, there is. It could be argued that the reason that Twitter pulled down his Twitter account, which showed tremendous success against COVID-19, and it could be that Tapper is asking questions like this, and so is USA Today, because they think that the American people are so stupid that if they get any good news at all, then they'll simply just walk out into the streets and start licking doorknobs. That's what they think of us. They think we're children. And the same reaction after 9/11, same thing. They couldn't report on any bad news about Islamic terrorism here or abroad because they were convinced that if we heard that, we would simply go out into the streets and start pulling Muslims out of their houses and beating them to death with tire irons. That's what they think of us. So, if they're trying to destroy morale with questions like that, you have to ask yourself whose side are they on. And if you go back to that press conference with fictional press conference I just gave you with General Eisenhower, if that reporter had asked that question, why did you send those boys to die on Omaha Beach, General, when the other 4 beaches were providing minimum resistance? If that reporter had asked that question, the rest of the people in that room, including Eisenhower and all the rest of them, would have said, is this guy a Nazi spy? But the point is, it doesn't matter whether he's a Nazi spy. It doesn't matter. There's a strong reason for the Nazis to put him there, destroy American morale. That's good for the Germans. But it doesn't matter whether he's a Nazi spy or not. The damage to the morale is done. It doesn't matter where the motivation comes from in terms of what's behind this. Maybe there's nothing behind it. But why would an individual ask that kind of question when it can't possibly do any good, and all it can do is destroy morale and make people afraid instead of resolved? Resolved. There's a threat, a deadly threat, and it's going to hurt. And it's not even started to hurt. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And we accept that, and we're doing everything we can, and we're going to have to be brave together. And then when it's done, we'll have gotten through it, and we'll take our losses, and we'll mourn them. But that's resolve. Resolve is we're going to beat this thing. Fear is our leaders don't have any idea what they're doing, and people are needlessly dying because of their incompetence. There's no grounds for that. So why is Jake Tapper and that USA Today article trying to destroy the morale of the American people? Do they hate the American people that much? That's a possibility. They certainly think we're children. Or, and I don't believe in conspiracy theories as a general rule, but it is widely known and widely reported from multiple sources that China is spending as much money as they possibly can to buy as many good opinions as they can. Why else would you try to say that America has screwed this up so badly and China's done it really, really well? Why else would you say, if we had acted sooner, all of these deaths that really are a result of the Chinese allowing this virus out in the first place and lying about it, especially the lying about it? But what he's saying is, no, maybe that's not why people died. Maybe it's because we didn't do things right. Maybe our president didn't act soon enough. Whose side are you on? And it's not a question of are you on the Republican side or the Democrat side. The question is, whose side are you on? Are you on the side of America or are you on the side of the virus? Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of America? Or are you being paid by somebody to make their responsibility look like our incompetence? Question to ask yourself in the days and weeks to come. This show is made possible by the paying members of BillWhittle.com. We've had an influx of new members lately. We're very grateful for them, very grateful. And we're very grateful for our members that have been with us this whole time. These shows cost money to produce, and our members insist that we put everything out there for free. They don't want members-only content. They want the message to get out. If you're one of those people who believe that you're getting something of value, we sure would love it if you would help step up and help pay for it for the people that aren't. There's only a few out there who hear that call, but if you're one of them, please head over to BillWhittle.com and click on the Become a Member link, and we'll continue to keep information like this out here, and especially analysis like this too. That'll do it for this edition of the CoronaSphere Lounge. It's the 1st of April, and this isn't an April Fool's Day joke, I'm sorry to say. We'll be back tomorrow with episode 14. Until then, stay strong, stay resolved, stay brave, and just remember we have not yet begun to fight, and that America's finest hour is still in front of it, and it always will be. We'll see you tomorrow.